and Housing. It is Wednesday, March 26th. What we're about to do now is we're doing an informal review of a bill, which is the Senate Housing and Commerce, Housing and
Economic Development,
Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs Committee produced this version of their housing bill. And we don't have possession of it yet. We will very soon, but we don't have it yet. So this is an informal review, and it's time just to get a head start on this. It'll give everybody a sense of what's in it. It's not gonna change in the next day or two, but we may not get. It could, but it's unlikely. You'll probably have possession of it at the end of the week, but we don't yet. So Cameron, our legislative counsel, Cameron Wood is here to help us walk through this and take questions. What I would suggest is if you not wait, if you have a question on something he goes through.
Let me start with a question.
Yeah.
Is this the bill that it's it's my understanding that the Senate is, where the committee is offering amendments to their own bill, or is that their?
For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. S-127 is the housing bill, the Senate Economic Development, House and General Affairs Committee bill that they voted out and was introduced as S-127. Members of that committee have an amendment that is on the calendar to amend the bill as it came out of that committee.
Okay.
So that bill, I was mistaken, that amendment is still under consideration.
So yes, for the record and for everyone here in the committee room, the bill has, similar to your bill, it was introduced, it went to Senate Finance, it then went to Senate Appropriations. There are amendments proposed to the bill as introduced, both from Senate Appropriations, similar to what your House Appropriations Committee has done to strip out all of the funds associated with the bill. Members of the Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs Committee have their own individual amendment, which is on the Senate calendar to the bill. And it has not been taken up on the floor. So it has not passed second reading, has not certainly by nature of that passed third reading. And so the only thing I can really speak to is the bill as introduced.
So this document that we all have is the bill as introduced. It does not reflect appropriations, Senate appropriations amendments. It does not reflect amendments by the committee itself proposed.
So the bill, as you end up receiving it, presuming the Senate body passes it, could look different than what we're going to talk about.
Was it referred to Senate Finance?
Yes.
So Senate Finance also has reviewed it. Did they amend it?
Similar to how it worked in the House, it has taxes in it, so it went to Finance first.
Finance is the Senate equivalent of Ways and Means here.
Correct. And the committee did not offer amendments. However, they are continuing to deliberate on the bill. And individual members of that committee may be offering an amendment. That is what they have stated on the record.
Okay.
So two options here. I can either, Mr. Chair, how you would like me to proceed. I can either pull up 127 and we could just walk through it, or what I have started to do is pull together a side-by-side, which you all don't have because I'm still working on it and I just sent it 2 seconds before I walked in the committee room. But I'm happy to pull this up and talk about this if you would find this to be more helpful than simply walking through the bill by itself.
I think that with my view would be that the side by side would be most helpful at this point.
Okay. with that, I understand that it is small, tiny language. It's already up to 38 pages. So to keep it condensed, that's how we have it. So again, for the record, just wanting to be absolutely explicitly clear for the members of this committee and individuals watching online. This is a side-by-side comparison simply of H 479 and 127 as they were introduced. As you all are aware, because you talked about it this morning, 479 has proposed recommendations on the floor from Ways and Means and Appropriations. Senate bill will be working its way through its own body over the next few days as well. So it could look different as it comes to you, in which case this side by side will need to be updated, etc. I started this just recently. That's why it has a draft watermark on it, because I'm not comfortable at this point saying it's in its final state. I have tried to start going through and highlighting differences between the two sections, but just understand that I have not been able to do a full front to back review of that. So there could be some things that I missed. The other piece that I will just comment as we walk through, what I've tried to do is compare relevant sections to each other. So for example, you have a universal design study committee in your bill. There is a separate study committee in the Senate version that is different. It is not the same section number. And in those instances, I've highlighted where the section number is different, but I've included them together here side by side. So you understand, because I see those two things as similar study committees, etc. I've included the things that you have in your bill that are not in S-127, and I've included most things in S-127 that are not in your bill. The only thing that I have not included in this side by side is the tax increment financing pieces. You'll see it when I get to it. I've highlighted section 16 and 17 related to tax increment financing, and I've simply made a note that I did not include them here because that's a whole very deep can of worms, and I'm not the attorney drafting it, so I did not feel comfortable pulling that over without John Gray's blessing, and I wanted to call it out that it's not here, but just understand that there are a lot of changes to tax increment financing. Specifically, I think the acronym is CHIP, project-based financing.
Of course, we don't have anything on tax increment financing,
Correct.
so it's all new. It's important, but in the side, there's nothing yet.
Just highlighting for you all that, so if you're looking at it and you're like, hey, why isn't the tax increment stuff in here? I know it's in S-127. I'm letting you know now I didn't include it. Okay, so just walking through section 1, 479 and 127, both deal with the Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program, VHIP. Some of the things in here are simply editing. The versions went through editing at 2 different times, and our team identified a few different things, and so commenting that I believe that your version, which has this highlighted, the subsection B, if you recall, this is the section related to wanting to call out that entities that are loaning out funds under the program are not considered licensed lenders. They're not financial institutions loaning out money. And so this was an edit that was recommended by the administration that we got into one version of the bill and not the other version in the other body. Okay. Moving forward, I'm going to go to the next page, page 2. As you can see here under the subsection E, the primary differences between your version and the S-127 Senate version as it was introduced is the Senate removed the 5-year program as was recommended by the administration. That was originally in your drafting request committee bills we discussed, and this committee kept the 5-year loans. The next big change is here in subsection 2. I shouldn't say change, the difference, the next difference between the two bills is these are the populations that must be served when a landlord is receiving a 5-year loan or a grant. If you recall, when they bring that unit online, the landlord has to then lease to an individual who falls into one of these populations. The Senate is recommending to add a identifier in this list of individuals who are displaced due to activity related to climate change or due to a natural disaster.
Sorry, did you say added or replaced?
It would be added.
Okay.
So it would be a new sub 4. So your new sub 4 would be sub 5 in their instance. Okay, I'm going to keep going. The next changes, as you can see in their version, it is still making the change under the 10-year forgivable loans that it would be going to market rent. And so removing the list of the population, same as what is in page 479.
Market rent,
Yes, sir.
which is different than market rent.
Correct. So the next change here, or difference, I should say, stop saying change. The next difference is in your version as introduced, we have the minimum set aside for the 5-year program. Because the Senate was striking the 5-year program, obviously this language is not there. So all you're seeing there on bottom of 4 and 5 of this document is your addition of that subsection related to minimum set aside for the 5-year.
Okay, so this is, I don't think, I could be wrong. I don't think that this reflects necessarily anything other than we negotiated the whole compromise, much of which was suggested by DHCD. We negotiated it here in this committee, and I just, don't think that made it over there. So it's just the kind of thing that can be worked out.
Okay, so in this section, you also have the creation of the revolving loan under sub I, so that's the same. So I will highlight the lack of highlight on subsection J. As I mentioned, I'm still working on this and it is a draft. That should be highlighted as subsection J on the left column, which is 479 as you all introduce it. This is the annual report. Because you're asking for the set aside, you are also wanting information from the department on an annual basis about what happens with these units after the requirements expire. So that is not in the Senate version. Okay, moving to section 2. For both bills, it is the manufactured home improvement repair program. I have not gone through this line by line to see if there was a specific difference. My recollection is there is no difference. These are both as recommended by the administration and are, nearly word for word as the program currently exists in second law. So there was no distinction between that program and either bill. So we're now on section 3, which is for both bills, the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund. The change here, as you can see, I don't believe there's any changes to any of the language except when we get to the application criteria. You'll see on the right-hand side, the Senate version has that ranking on the community index. You all recommended striking that. That's the only difference in this section. Okay. We're moving to what is in section 4 of your bill. And what I will highlight, as I started drafting this up, what I did was on the left side, which is 479, I just did your bill in order, section numbers by section numbers. And here's where you'll see I started to pull different sections from the Senate bill. So they're not always going to line up exactly. So on the left, you have section 4, which is the Residential Universal Design Study Committee. And on that is not in the Senate version. They have a study committee associated with developing a state plan to generate a state plan to develop housing for individuals with developmental disabilities. So I'm not necessarily going to go through this line by line. You all will have access to this document now. It's on your webpage, so you can grab it and look through. I assume when the bill comes over, we'll do another detailed walkthrough of what's in it. And we can get into, more detailed specifics, but just in the interest of time, I'm gonna just kind of keep us going, but you'll see membership here. Like, I didn't go through and see exactly who's on each committee and what the difference is. We can do that when we get there. But just, I will pause just to highlight what this committee is primarily designed for, or what the primary responsibility of the Senate committee is. And you'll see on sub C here. So the committee shall create an actionable plan to develop housing for individuals with developmental disabilities that reflects the diversity needs expressed by those individuals and their families, including individuals with high support needs who require 24-hour care and those with specific communication needs. The plan shall include a schedule for the creation of at least 600 additional units of service-supported housing, the number and description of the support needs of individuals with developmental disabilities anticipated to be served annually, anticipated funding needs, and recommendations for changes in state laws or policies that are obstacles to the development of housing needed by individuals with Medicaid-funded home and community-based services.
So it's really new. And I mean, it's related, but it's new. Yeah,
They are different, but somewhat related, overlap a little bit.
Any idea how much, did you say you have not been able to see, the Sen Finance? No, because it's passed over. Any idea how much was allocated for that study?
0.
Yeah.
when nothing is allocated. As I remember, per diems for people who are state employees, I don't think we need a budget allocation in the budget for that. I think it just goes. It's a question of money. It's the outsiders who need money, I think. Is that right?
So there are 2 legislators on that committee, 1 senator, 1 representative. There is language in here about per diems for the legislative members only. There is no appropriation for that. It was recommended to be stripped by Senate appropriations, just so you know.
How much was requested, do you know?
It was not discussed on the record in that.
Oh.
So individuals who are state employees, if they are participating, so, you do have members on the committee, Commissioner of Dale, Commissioner of Department of Housing, State Treasurer. Those individuals are going to be paid for their time to work on said committee. So it would just be, you have other individuals, Green Mountain Self Advocates, Vermont Care Partners, those individuals, to the extent their organization is not willing to support their time on said committee and not pay for it, they would not be compensated. As to state employees and whether their expenses would be covered, I'm not entirely sure. In my experience working at the Department of Labor, if there was an expense necessary for participating on a report, we would cover it. And it would just come out of our base funding. So, okay. Report November 15th. Other than that, generally, similar. It's got the Secretary of Human Services calling the first meeting, et cetera. But okay. Now, next section on your bill is the information provided for the tax grand list, information from municipalities going to the tax department, the computer assisted mass appraisal system. This is not in S-127. Okay. Next section in your bill is the tax credits, section 6 tax credits. We talked about this morning. Similar it is in S-127 as section 4. So they're just different section numbers. Other than that, it's the same language.
This is, I'm sorry, which?
These are the tax credits.
Credits for HFA
Yes, correct.
for both programs?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you happen to know the fate of that in Senate Finance?
It's the Senate Finance Committee has testified on the record, I should back up. Individual members of the Senate Finance Committee have testified on the record of their desire to strip it out at this point. However, just to be clear, it came out of Senate Finance intact, but it was removed from Senate, it was recommended to be removed in Senate Appropriations. So to the extent it gets prioritized as they work on the budget after the budget comes over on the House, I can't speak to. But on the record, members of Senate Finance have been opposed to it, at least not having enough time to discuss it, etc. So. Okay, but the language as it was introduced are similar. Section 7 in your bill, and for those who are following along electronically, I'm on page 16. Section 7 in your bill is the DHCD Land Bank report. This was not in 127. Section 8 is starting to move into the appeals sections. None of this is in S-127. The only thing in S-127 related to appeals is the LURB study, which gets down here to what is section 12 in your bill. I'm now on page 20, just side by side. Section 12 in your bill is similar to what is in section 9 of the Senate bill, which is to shorten the time frame of that appeal study. That is the only thing that the committee did related to appeals. Okay. Now we're moving into brownfield. So what I've done is I've copied the sections that are similar here. Later on down, you'll see that the Senate version S-127 has additional sections related to brownfields. I didn't include them here. You'll see them later in the document. But to compare section by section, when you're looking at this brownfield property cleanup program section, you can see the difference in the subsection C's here is just that yours has additional language about when the secretary has to prioritize review. Secretary prioritizes review for remediation of a site that contains housing. That's what's in the Senate version. Yours includes or a site that is planned for the construction or rehabilitation of a single family, multifamily housing. So it's a little more expansive in your version. Section 13, again, here's where I haven't had the chance to go through specifically line by line, word by word, but my understanding is this report is similar. Brownfields process improvement report that's in your bill was also in the Senate bill. I don't believe there's any changes.
Cameron, before we leave brownfields, their appropriation for brownfields was 4 million.
Yes, sir.
By the way, it turns out that on our chart that was prepared by JFO, brownfields wasn't mentioned. We had a $2 million appropriation for brownfield. Do you know what its fate was?
I don't recall there being an appropriation for brownfields, but you're going to tell me what its fate was. So
Actually, maybe I'm wrong. But do you know what the fate of the 4 million in the Senate is?
they stripped it out. But again, I don't know, I don't know what Senate Appropriations intention is with that recommendation. They just, in similar fashion to the House, they stripped all of the appropriations out, or their recommendation is to strip all of the appropriations out of the bill.
Yeah, but I mean, do you know whether they then took out the appropriation out of the budget?
Well, the Senate doesn't have the budget.
Right. So before you told us there were recommendations being developed in Senate approach, was there anything on that?
I don't know where this recommendation lies on their list of priorities. It was a priority for the Senate Economic Development Committee, and they wanted to include it in their bill to signal to Senate Appropriations their desire to have that funding. It was initially 6 million and it was reduced down to 4 million, 2 million of which goes to, I believe it's regional planning commissions. but whether Senate appropriations is going to support that or not, I do not know.
Okay, you're right. I don't know what happened to it, but the 2 million wasn't in our bill. Okay,
Okay. So we are on page 23 of this doc. Again, this is the section that's in your bill related to, kind of redirecting some brownfield funds to the environmental contingency fund established here. And as you can see, that is similar language, similar language in both bills there. Now I'm going to move to the top of page 24.
this was on page,
That was the bottom of page 23. Okay.
wait. In our bill. This is what I was referring to. In our bill,
You were referring to that section?
just a second, I just want to double check something. Yeah, I was.
Okay. So that section, if that is what you're referring to, section 15 in your bill, this one here on the screen, that remains intact
Okay,
from what came out of this committee in 479. That was not stripped by appropriations because it's really a redirection of money that has already been appropriated. So it's not, it may be money that will then subsequently be allowed for a new purpose, but it's not new money
yeah,
in this fiscal year. So it was not stripped in House appropriations. And as you can see, it is in the Senate version as well. And the Senate appropriations has not recommended to strip that section. The Senate version, S-127, has a separate appropriation of an additional $4 million in FY26. So
okay, so their 2.5 is section 14.
yes, sir.
Section 13 is the report. Section,
It's section 15 in ours.
but in there, so
It's
section
section
14, okay, I
Yeah.
couldn't find section 14, okay. Same,
Okay. So section 16 in your bill is short-term rental, not in S-127. Section 17 and 18 relate to the landlord certificate, the repeal, and then reintroduction with some slight tweaks, not in S-127. So I'm gonna keep going. VHFA offsite construction report, not in S-127 as it was introduced. It was in draft versions of their committee bill as they walked through the process, but they stripped it before it was introduced. Now we're getting to the appropriation section. You have the section 20 related to the positions, not in S-127. And then when we get to the appropriations piece, both sections 21, what I've done is I've tried to align up their appropriation to yours. And I haven't completed the full highlights here. But I wanted to call out their appropriation only had appropriations to the Department of Housing and Community Development. And it was 15 for the middle income, 15 for the rental housing revolving loan fund, both split, not together. They had the 9.1 for the Vermont Bond Bank, which I believe was in the administration's recommendation. They have the 4 million for VHIP, 2 million for manufactured home. They did have the 500,000 for the Naval Works affiliated home ownership centers, which is similar to what you had in your bill. So I highlighted over here on your section column, the left column, simply because, it's 30 million for those two instead of 20, and it's 9.1 for
What page are
the
you on?
existing ability fund, page 28 of my side by side. Now, you might be asking yourself, why is there a blue highlight down here on the bottom on the right? I highlighted that because that was more of an error on our part being me. There was a section in the Senate version as they were walking through, and it was to create a rental payment pilot program in the state treasurer's office for the state treasurer to develop a pilot to help report positive rental payments for individuals. So the treasurer would contract with a third party to then work to onboard landlords who would then report rental payments as part of an individual's credit reporting. And it was set up as a pilot program, and it had $100,000 going to the state treasurer for that purpose. That section was struck from the bill before it was introduced. I simply didn't strike the appropriation. So it's listed in their bill as an appropriation, but it's an appropriation to nothing because that section was removed. Obviously, the Senate Appropriations Committee is recommending to strike this entire section because it's dealing with appropriations. So if that were accepted by the body, this would go away. So I'm simply keeping it there because it was in the bill as introduced, and I'm highlighting it a different color so you all know it's not in the bill. Okay. Effective dates, and as you can see, there's just all the appropriations from this committee not included. Effective dates.
So there's no grants. There's no grants to Vermont. There's no trades, scholarship grants, BSC, et cetera, which were stripped out of ours. Correct.
Their bill takes effect 2025, yours has the design committee and then the landlord certificate, so it's got those exceptions. So, okay, now what we're doing is we're transitioning here on page 30. Now what you'll see on the right-hand side is everything in their bill that's not in your bill. Section 6, they have included language that was also in 169. Not all of it, but some of it. What they have done, and I'm gonna skip to section 7 and 8 here. In the public accommodations section, they have added or are proposing to add citizenship and immigration status. But in the unfair housing practices, only citizenship. That's the difference between what is in 169 that's in this committee. They also don't have the language about prohibiting the use of social security number as part of a rental application. So the only thing they pulled over was adding those classes, citizenship and immigration status in the public accommodations section, it's a subchapter, but only citizenship in the unfair housing practices piece. That makes sense? Okay.
Do you think I'm kind of so
You're following along in 3 different documents?
Yeah, let's say that you may not, this may, I guess, really be a question for Sophie. So at this point, it's merely a declaration that you can't have discrimination based on these things. It doesn't, the issue of whether asking for a social security number asking for a social security number would amount to discrimination, would have to be litigated.
If this were to pass as the Senate has drafted it, I think it's going to be a very fact-specific scenario.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is what they're proposing is to add citizenship into the Unfair Housing Practices Act. So if a landlord were to then say, I'm only taking social security numbers, I don't care if you have some sort of federal tax identification number or some other information, and I'm using that to try to exclude people who are not citizens of this country. One could argue that that would be discrimination, that would be prohibited. You would then have to go to court and you would have to be able to prove to the court that that is what the person is doing and they're doing it for the purpose of discriminating against individuals who are citizens. So I imagine, and not having litigated anything in this space, that may be difficult to prove. But,
Yeah, okay, well, got it.
okay. So that is what they've included there, and as you can see on the left-hand side, I've indicated these are not in your bill, so I'm gonna keep us scrolling down to section 10. So now we're moving back into brownfield, so I'm not the attorney to kind of speak in depth to these issues. That would be Michael O'Grady, as you guys are aware. But there are a few sections here related to brownfields that were included in the Senate version that are not in your bill. This section specifically related to management of development soils. I'm not going to speak to this in depth because I didn't draft it and haven't reviewed it before I walked in this room. There is another report. So it's adding language to say, as part of this biennial report, the Secretary of Natural Resources has to report on the status of the management of soils as changed up here. And then section 15, which is on page 36 of this side-by-side, is where you'll see the additional appropriation that was recommended from the Senate Economic Development Committee, which is $4 million from the general funds to the brownfield revitalization funds, 2 million of which would have to be awarded to regional planning commissions.
It's not an additional 2 million?
It's, I don't want to call it additional. Your bill doesn't appropriate new money. And neither does that section up there that's similar. They don't appropriate new money. They move money right. And so this would be adding an additional 4 million appropriation for FY26. Okay, section 16 and 17. This is where, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are many new sections being added related to tax increment financing and project-based TIFs, and I just didn't include it here without the blessing of the attorney who's working on those sections, and I can't speak to it, so I didn't want to distract.
But it's all new.
Yes, I didn't want to distract from the,
To remind members of the committee, one of the major things we heard in our testimony before us is that it was really essential to try to find ways to finance infrastructure that's related to housing in ways that does not overly impact the price of it. One way to do that came up in joint hearings, remember we had joint hearings with Commerce, was some form of tax financing where you use the increment, the full increment to buy, and the flow of the full tax increment as the increase in property taxes developed because the new development was adding to the value, to actually use that increment of additional taxes to pay off bonds, which were used to finance the infrastructure. Another approach is to, for a period of time, X, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, to approve a tax abatement for the project, which is just a way of essentially allowing the developer, when they do their numbers, they realize that they don't have to have a line for property taxes, and that allows them to may make the project more feasible. It may make it feasible at a lower rate. Another approach is to try to make it easier to get a positive vote on a assessment district, which would increase the property taxes a little bit of people who are benefited by whatever they're building, and allow the bond vote for that assessment district, as it is in almost every other state, to be voted on by the people who are going to pay. Now, everybody in the town gets to vote on it, even if they're not affected. And finally, there was the bond bank. So there were four different possible approaches to infrastructure, one of which made it through in our bill. And it was a very sort of a decision by Chair Marcotte and myself to allow more time for this by essentially allowing the Senate to develop these ideas and bring them over for tax increment financing, et cetera. And then we would have time to sort of merge the two together. So it's not as if all this stuff that's in their bill is a surprise. It's what we want. Thank you.
And, sorry,
Go ahead.
and that, property valuation fees or abatement or is in what they're working on or no? Don't
No
know.
idea.
Okay.
I
perfect.
think I haven't read
I
it,
apologize for that.
No worries.
I have no idea.
I appreciate your
I,
frankness.
but not all.
I don't think it is. I think that came from our conversations and our plans to put it in when it came,
Yeah.
but I could be completely wrong.
No, I think you're right. I haven't read it yet, but I think what's in here is we gave them the language from Let's Grow Homes as, and Let's Build Homes. And,
Both work.
yeah, well, there's Let's Grow Kids, and Let's Build Homes. All right, and we gave them that language as something that looked promising, and they built on that. But I don't think they've done the other two yet.
There, in those sections, just for those, if you want to dive straight to it, they begin, I believe it's on page 28 of the Senate bill, and it goes all the way to page 47. So, I mean, it is quite significant portion of their bill.
Yeah, that's the only 0% interest option.
Okay, so again, just on the side by side, highlighting that those are not here. I will also comment that Senate Finance was continuing to take testimony on those sections as of yesterday. And has on the record discussed the potential for amendments to those sections on the floor of the Senate. So that's again why I didn't want to include it here, because that is one of the pieces that I think is most possible to be amended.
Do you have any sense as to what the timing in the Senate will be in terms of action on the floor? Next week, maybe?
No, I believe they will get to action. My understanding is they will get to action this week. I would not anticipate getting the bill until mid next week. My understanding is even after they pass it, it has to lie for a day in the Senate before it comes over. So even if they were to get to it, today and tomorrow, it would lie Friday. If it's tomorrow and Friday, it would have to lie after that. So.
And their budget, and we won't know the fate of their suggested appropriations until their budget is approved, right? And do you know when that would be? No, okay, thank you.
Okay. Bring us back here, section 18. So this is the bottom of page 36 of this side by side. There is a provision here related to income taxes. This is amending a specific definition related to income taxes, and it is top of page 37, specifically associated with allowing for deductions that are currently allowed at the federal level attributed to payments for entrance fees or reoccurring monthly payments made to a continuing care retirement community.
Where is this in the bill?
This is section 18. I believe it's on page 47 of S-127. It's either 47 or 48.
Section 18.
Yes, sir.
I know,
Deducted line 13.
okay.
If you want.
What about the Economic Progress Council?
Which is,
That's section 17.
that's related to Tax increment finance.
That's right, yeah,
Yes.
that's the EPC, okay, that's right, yeah.
If you have questions about this section in particular, I would point you to either Ted with JFO, who my understanding is, pulled together background information on this in the past, or Kirby Keaton, who is the tax attorney for our office. Section 19 and 20 relate to new accessory dwelling units. As you can see here in section 20. Again, if you have specific questions on this, I would defer to Kirby, but I will just comment at a high level in section 20. So this is in my side by side, looking at this subsection A here. It is basically exempting from property tax if an individual builds an accessory dwelling unit where a property's been rehabilitated using the VHIP program. It would maintain the taxable value of the property in the year immediately preceding the improvements. So you're kind of capping the property value from increasing based on a VHIP rehabilitation or building of an accessory dwelling unit. You're freezing that property tax for 3 years. And that's what you'll see here. The exemption from municipal and education property taxes. And it has language here to say, it wouldn't prohibit a decrease in the event, for some reason, destruction of the property, etc. It would be able to decrease, but it would not increase for a period of 3 years. Subsection D, 3 years. Okay. And then that's it.
So that's any ADU and then something to VHIP. The property certificate.
It is tied to this definition, so I just, I don't want to make the blanket statement and say any ADU. I would want to go grab that definition and take a look, but the language is the property's been improved through the construction of a new accessory dwelling unit. Or, and then under the sub one, the property's been rehabilitated or improved using a grant or loan from VHIP. Those provisions, the tax provisions that I just spoke about, sections 18, 19, and 20, have been stripped from the bill based on the recommendation by Senate Appropriations. As far as whether or not Senate Finance supports them, they've been discussing on the record over the past few days. And I'll leave it at that. But it has been recommended to be stripped from the Appropriations Committee. Again, as far as whether the Appropriations Committee would support something like that moving forward, I don't know. That is the end of the side by side. So as you recall, just again, walking through, I tried to include in your bill, just walking through each section, identifying where in your bill, the Senate version, things are not in the Senate version that are in your bill. And then at the end of the side by side after the effective dates, walking through the things that are in the Senate version, but not in your bill.
I'm just wondering, so, the process now will be to go through we're gonna have committee discussion on each section. This was just the walkthrough.
This is just informal.
Yeah,
What
like an
I've
introduction.
asked for is a meeting of Chairman Marcotte, Representative Branning from their committee, myself, at least maybe others from our committee, and Senator Clarkson from her committee, just to informally talk about what could be the outline of a joint bill. A bill that would make our two committees happy and their committee happy, and see if we can just begin that process sooner rather than later. And but as soon as there's any kind of sense of, well, first of all, as soon as we have the bill in our possession, if it's referred to us, or, we can decide how to proceed. We might have joint hearings with Commerce. We might not, we might, we'll just have to see. I think the sooner we can get to a rough outline of what might work, the better. I think that, we want to try to work something out as quickly as we can, and then Senator Clarkson can test that out in the Senate, et cetera. What's going on is the Senate has our bill, we have their bill. And what we want to do is get to an agreed draft. There are two ways to do that. And that means a draft that would get through the Senate, including the Senate version of Ways and Means, which is Senate Finance and Senate Appropriations, et cetera, us as well. And ultimately, that can be done by negotiation, or it can be done by negotiation in the context of a committee of conference. And a committee of conference, 3 people would be appointed by the Speaker from the House, 3 people from the Senate, and then hash it out. So I'm not sure. I haven't been through this process before, so I'm not sure exactly how it will go. I do feel, it's really interesting. I don't know what your impressions are, but my impressions are, what's really notable about this is that it adds a lot of stuff that we didn't have, and that we have a lot of stuff it didn't have. It's not as if its primary nature is contradicting us. It's kind of like this. So it doesn't have comma and land bank report. It doesn't have short-term rental. It doesn't have the landlord certificate, of course, even ours anymore. It doesn't have the offsite report. It doesn't have the trades grants, but it has public accommodations and brownfield, more on brownfields. It has all the stuff on TIF. It has some new tax stuff. It has the same LURB date as we do. It has a rental pilot program in the treasurer's office, although that was struck. And its appropriations were somewhat similar to it. So it's actually, I think, I'm cautiously optimistic, because it's not like you have 2 texts which are just opposing each other.
Compliment.
Yeah. It does sound like the reaction of their Senate appropriations was somewhat similar to the appropriations of our committee, reaction to our committee, and their finance committee was somewhat similar to the reaction of our Ways and Means. So we'll just have to navigate it. Questions of anybody? Comments? Yes.
I'm just wondering whether it's too late to try to get the VHFA down payment programs funded.
My impression, I do not know, and Cameron, do you know? I don't know how much freedom the 2 bodies have to add material that is not in either one of their drafts. But I think if they're agreed upon by both bodies, and that includes 3 committees here and 3 committees, 4 committees here and 3 committees there, we could put whatever we want in,
You're talking about the VHFA tax credits.
for example.
They are in both bills as introduced. So if you wanted them in, you can offer a floor amendment to the House bill to add it back in if the body approves the recommendation of the substitute of appropriations. Approves that amendment. So now it's struck. You can offer an individual amendment to add it back in. The committees, as you work through the House and the Senate, You can add it back into the Senate version as it comes over. It could become, if the committees go to a conference committee, it could be added in there. There are multiple different ways for it to be added back in,
Yeah, I mean,
depending on how you as an individual would like to proceed. But one of them is you can offer an individual amendment to add it back into the bill. You as a committee could add it back into the Senate bill and send it back out. Again, it would then, if the Senate bill's coming back out of here, it's probably going to go back to Ways and Means. I don't know if at that point it goes to appropriations, if the budget has been passed. You know, that's a question I would ask the Ways and Means and Appropriations chairs, because it's technically related to taxes, but the Appropriations Committee in the past looks at that and says, if you reduce taxes, then you reduce our ability to spend money. So
Yeah, just gonna add. There may be other folks who, as the budget progresses, have floor amendments that are coming, you know, that's up to the individual to decide if that's something that's important enough to you to do. But it would face a lot of hurdles.
I think my own guesstimate is that the most productive thing is to use the negotiations amongst the three committees to try to see what we can put back in. And it really depends upon whether in some context or in some way or another, we can convince our own appropriations committee and their appropriations committee to go with it when they didn't before it. I mean, I think this is the hurdle and somehow if we could do it in the form of a negotiated settlement between the House and the Senate, I think it'd have a better chance. Because the problem is, right now where we stand in the House is that House appropriations didn't want it.
Yeah.
So if an individual here were to make an amendment to put it back in right now on the floor, what would happen? Well, we would have to have a pause while all three committees.
Right.
And what you'd end up with is maybe a positive vote here and a negative vote in appropriations and a negative vote, okay, after which there would be a floor vote on the amendment, and I don't know how it would go, but I suspect it would be a problem to get it through with that. In other words, we have to change the status quo.
I guess what I'm saying, what I'm expressing is just that I totally, like, for the record, the Approps Committee, I do not envy their, splitting the baby situation, to get biblical. But I think I'm frustrating that we don't get them to come in here and say, here's the logic behind what we've done. This is how this kind of goal, right? Like breaking cycles of poverty. This is how we addressed it. This is how we put our money where our mouth is on that goal. And it seems like we haven't had a chance to hear that. And so I guess that's why I'm just wondering whether there's a chance for this to keep supporting this program.
I think there is, but I think probably the best chance is in the context of a renegotiation.
Yeah, right.
of the
Without
three
being
committees,
adversarial or without, putting, like, I certainly don't want to put this whole, bill.
Well,
at
what you're
risk or-
talking about is finding a context or a way to
Yeah.
re-argue this issue before our appropriations
Yeah.
and their appropriations.
But even for us to get out in the open and on the record for the public to hear, as well as for me as a committee member who cares about this, and all of us who voted for this bill, and those of us who thought that this was valuable programming for our state. I mean, you look at their numbers, they've given money to like over 2,000 low-income Vermonters. They've helped people in every single county of the state. Every, massive list of employers in our state whose workers, employees have benefited from this program. So it just seems like a big missed opportunity. And it's just not sitting well to just let it go. So I'm just hoping that, again, not to question the logic, I just would like the logic to be stated And if there is a way forward for that funding, and to hear from VHFA if there's anything that they, if there's any wiggle room on their end of what can be made possible. So that we can, I don't feel proud saying, we decided this just wasn't important as a body.
Joe,
Yeah, I think you bring up a very good point of when just getting their viewpoint of why. And there's a very good chance that the best work isn't done at midnight.
It's true.
Maybe
So-
for me.
That's always my hustle.
Whenever I hear that, I'm always just shake my head of, been in the building for 3 months and here we are, they're at midnight work.
Yeah.
You're like, really? This is when we. So yeah, like, was the decision that we were trying to get to 37 million, we just started. We've got to start cutting places and people just kind of said, yeah, okay, I guess, and that's how we got there, or was it like, yeah, I don't think anyone knows, sure. So
Good point.
people in this building.
Again, I fully recognize the parameters, like there are rules to how all of these things function. A lot of them are really anachronistic back when we didn't have technology. We didn't have a way to talk to each other, in the middle of the night or outside of a room face to face, or we didn't, have access to documents readily available. But yeah, anyway, that's an issue for GovOps, I guess.
any other questions of Cameron or comments on 127 and its current status?
Thank you for the side by side, those.
Yes.
So helpful. Oh my God.
I think it's great, and I think it would be good to be surprised with changes to it as the Senate bill moves along.
What I will do is, so again, I will highlight for you all and those watching, it is a draft. I need to go back line by line. I will make some additional highlights of some things I've already missed that were, changes or differences, I should say. I will send that back around once I've kind of done that. So you all have a, version of, I'll try to label it 1.2. And I'll send that to the committee so you all have it. And then as the bill moves its way through the Senate, we can incorporate it into the side by side and adding the tax increment financing pieces as well. Again, I think there's potentially some changes there based on what Senate Finance is working through today. And then there is an individual instance of amendment with 4 senators on it recommending to add 2 additional sections to their bill. So if that happens, then we'll make sure when it comes back over, we'll be happy to come in and do a more thorough, detailed walkthrough of that bill, as opposed to looking at a side by side, just walking through section by section. So.
Speaking of side by sides, I'm just looking on the page, I'm not in it. Was there conversation of a side by side of the bill and what was taken out, or is this art considered that? Is this that, or is there gonna, can we do something like with what was taken out and what we have and what's left?
I can walk through real quick. I don't have a document to point to at this point, other than the appropriations amendment.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was asking. No worries.
But the appropriations committee is recommending to strip all the money out.
Yeah,
So primarily that's the Universal Design Study Committee.
Yeah.
Although that funding is included in their budget recommendation.
okay.
Removing the 250,000 for the offsite construction report for VHFA, that was struck. That did not make it in the budget. And the appropriations committee is recommending to add a section to basically say VHFA is not required to do that report if there was no money. And the other pieces were Ways and Means and Appropriation are both striking the section for municipal 1% tax on short-term rentals. And then the remainder is just removing the appropriation. So they didn't change any of the other substantive pieces of your bill. Other than that. And
I just
then,
really liked your visual of the side by side. That was really helpful to have it with the arrows and the highlights. Super helpful. But no, but thank you. That's also clear. Thank you.
Superb.
could have highlighted them a different color and say, this is what appropriations is recommending to remove. Might see if I can do that, but it may not be helpful to you by 1 o'clock. I may not be able to do it by 1 o'clock, that's my point.
No worries, no
I think
worries.
it's a great, I love the recommendation. I mean, that's a thought for me to keep in mind next time I do one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
All
your
right.
work.
Thank you very much. Anything else? We have nothing more today, other than merely, the floor. Merely the floor and,
Go get,
our report on the floor. We do have, tomorrow, just to highlight, we will convene at 9 a.m. and we will be hearing H-173, which is an act relating to granting public higher education, the employees' right to strike. That, along with, that's at the moment the only thing scheduled before lunch. And there are Sophie from our ledge council and 3 witnesses. So we'll see, we don't have a vote scheduled or anything on that, but we are hearing testimony. Any questions before we cease? In that case,
Let's see.